joins us this morning. Senator Pittman, brought to us by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. And, well, for the first time in a long time, we got you in the studio with us. Good morning.
Good morning, Todd. It's good to be here in person.
Well, it's good to have you here, and we've got a lot to talk about. First of all, your reaction, Supreme Court yesterday turning down the House resolution that would have restricted the governor's powers and the disaster powers that the governor claims. Siding with the governor on really a technicality, saying that he didn't get it in order to sign it, so you don't really have a case.
Yeah, it was disappointing. Not entirely surprising, though, Todd, given the makeup of our current Supreme Court. But it goes to the underlying issue of why we also passed a constitutional amendment. Because at the end of the day, what we need to do is make it clear in the Constitution that there is co-equal governance. There are co-equal branches. That's how our Constitution was designed. And what we need to do is put the power back to the voters and the public to have a ballot question that limits the ability of any executive, Democrat or Republican, from instituting emergency declarations and using them really for potentially the entire tenure of their term.
And onward, because of things like Reggie, which would be so long term that, and that's a part of what this is all about too.
Yeah, I mean, Reggie is an executive order. It's interesting that executive order came out in October of last year, and it's basically been the prologue of what we have experienced throughout this pandemic.
Yeah, it's just amazing the way that. Well, let's put it this way. We got to do another resolution, or you have to pass the constitutional amendment in another session before it can go to the voters.
Right.
And that should restore, if the voters would approve, the balance of power to the way that it should be. 3 co-equal branches of government. And
yes,
as Senator Corman said, not 1 king and 2 subservient boards.
That's exactly right. I mean, we are a constitutional republic for a reason. The whole premise of our republic is co-equal governance and divided responsibilities, divided duties, and checks and balances. That's how we got to be in this position in the first place. Mm-hmm. And it's ironic that we're celebrating our Independence Day on Saturday, which was the entire premise of what our founding fathers strived for.
The citizens groups across the state, we just heard of another event that is going to be held tomorrow afternoon here in Indiana, another march. Seems like they're getting more and more fed up with all of this. And one of the things I think is a real problem with all of this is you can bend science to say whatever you want science to say. And if you're not framing the question correctly, the exact opposite of what something is supposed to be is what we rely upon, and that seems to have happened in this case.
We have warped this discussion so badly. When this began, this was about flattening the curve to ensure that our healthcare system did not become overwhelmed. In this area, our healthcare system never was overwhelmed. To the extent there was a curve to flatten, we flattened it. And if you look at our numbers and our statistics, even though we're testing thousands of people every day, we're coming back with hundreds of positive cases. And yet, even though we're at about 600 positive cases a day, which is a third of what we were at our peak when we were testing fewer people, our hospitalizations have declined. Our mortality rate has declined. We have 1/4 of the people in the hospital with COVID-19 than we did at the peak. We have 1/6 of the people on a ventilator. And we never reached or exceeded our healthcare capacity in this Commonwealth. And so I'm just confused that because cases are going up, and which is what we had expected and candidly wanted, so we could identify where the virus was and encourage people who have it to be self-quarantined to limit its spread. We're finding it within the less vulnerable populations because we're testing more people.
I don't want to turn this into my gripe session about this or that issue with COVID-19 because you've been at work again this week. You'll be back at work again next week, and it's a really, really difficult season for the legislature this 2020 year. So what were some of the things that you were discussing this week?
Well, boy, the discussions, and they seem like a lifetime ago. This week, most of our discussions were on police reform efforts, trying to find the right balance to support our law enforcement community while giving our communities comfort in knowing that law enforcement will be held accountable in those rare circumstances where they abuse their power. Mm-hmm. So that was the major premise of our session this week. We got our revenue numbers for the fiscal year. They are terrible. We're about $3.6 billion below estimate of where we thought we were this fiscal year. Much will be told on July 15th when that's our official tax day. So we're going to have to wait and see how our revenues stabilize before we do a full-blown budget at the end of November.
Mm-hmm. So those are some really big issues. One of the other issues being discussed in Harrisburg and really across the state and the nation have to do with monuments. And we see Gettysburg in particular. People who've been to Gettysburg know that there are statues, there are memorials for the combatants in the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. Some of them Confederate, some of them Union. And with the atmosphere around monuments that are happening right now, the folks at Gettysburg are justifiably nervous that people are going to come up, and those things are exposed. They're all over that battlefield. It's a very, very wide area, and there could be some real damage done there. And so that discussion at Gettysburg, to me, is a fascinating one. And I know that in Harrisburg you're thinking about not just Gettysburg, but all around the Commonwealth, the various protective measures for public monuments.
I really have struggled with the end result of the monument discussion. There are undoubtedly been very terrible times throughout our history, but those terrible times have what have allowed us to learn, grow, and evolve. And history, as they say, is doomed to repeat itself if we do not learn from it. And we need to constantly learn from it, remember it, and understand it. And I think understanding how divided our nation was 150 some years ago, 160 years ago, is very important to keeping us united. And whether that's through a symbol of a monument or not, I think is secondary to understanding the history and the reality of where we've come from. And if I thought that removing monuments would restore a level of comfort within our nation, that would be one discussion. But it seems to me that we've had this debate about monuments and base namings and those kinds of things for decades, and I'm not sure how that repairs ultimately the painful experiences that we've had in the past.
Erasing the history doesn't seem to be the right approach.
That would be my perspective.
Yeah. But there are appropriate ways, and before we go destroying things, we got to find what those appropriate ways are. And those are the courses, the paths that we should follow.
That's my perspective on it. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so you're going to take off the 4th of July with everybody else and then get right back to it. By the way, I'm on vacation next week, so I'm not calling you next week.
That's fine. You call me anytime. No, we still have some things to do around the holiday and some work to be done. And I'm very concerned about where we've gone with this recent order on masks. And what's frustrating about the governor, and this is a perfect example, he issues a press release with an order. He will not come out. He will not answer questions. He will not give us an explanation. He uses words like order and require and law enforcement. He dumps it out on a press release, and it leaves it for the rest of us to figure out. And, if you want to be considerate of others around you, wash your damn hands and respect private, personal space. Masks are not the be-all and end-all. Can they help as a tool? Sure. But, they too can be hosts of bacteria. When you look at how you use a mask, for example, I walked into the studio today, I touched 2 doors, I touched 2 tables, I put the mask on, I took the mask off. I've touched the mask. I walk out on the street, I sweat. The mask gets wet. I mean, they are not a perfect instrument to this. And I don't know why we have had this sole focus on a mask. It's much broader than that. It's about personal hygiene and respecting personal space. And we've lost that entire conversation, and we've turned this and devolved it into some mask shaming exercise, which is counterproductive to the broader issue.
The inconsistency is what gets me. Masks, yes. Masks, no. Masks, maybe if you'd like. Masks, mandatory. Come up with a policy and stick with it.
I was watching some folks who work in the Capitol leave the Capitol, and they were wearing a mask until they got across the street when they took the mask off to take their cigarette break. It's like, where's the logic in all of this? I don't get it.
All right. So, State Senator Joe Pittman, you're back and hard at work at it. What are some of the things that you're looking at next week? You know?
Well, we really don't know. We were waiting to understand what the Supreme Court was going to do and how that would potentially affect things. I think we're probably going to be home next week. I personally have plenty of meetings and conversations to have here locally, so I'm hoping for some time here in the district where I can get, in my opinion, the real work that needs to be done.
It seems like forever ago that we were talking about, Senator, what's the summer public meeting schedule? Yeah. And we don't talk about those things anymore.
That's been turned upside down for sure.
But those are really important to understand what constituents are saying and what their needs are.
Right. Isolation is not good for anybody. You have to interact. You have to understand what people are thinking and feeling. And whenever we as elected officials become removed from our constituency, it's not a good thing.
Yeah. People can still, however, get in touch with your office and let you know what they feel.
Absolutely. SenatorPittman.com, 724-357-0151. I'd rather see you in person, but I understand that sometimes that's not possible these days.
Senator, thanks so much and happy 4th.
Todd, same to you. Thank you.
It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, 101.1 FM and AM 11s and AM 11s.